So this statement you've got in front of you is a statement that comes from a global survey given to a bunch of digital decision makers back in 2016, and it said 55% of companies without a digital transformation believe they have less than a year before they start to lose market share. And as we all know, Microsoft has made an incredible investment in business productivity and tools in digital transformation, putting it out into everyone's hands. And the objective of today's meeting is to introduce you to one of those tools, and that's Power Automate. My name is Mike Masschelin, or Michael Masschelin, as you can find me on the web. I'm a D365 solution architect at RSM. RSM is a 3-cloud Microsoft provider. I've been in the space for a little over 14 years, focused primarily on Dynamics AX, and now Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain. I left my contact information up here if you'd like to reach out or connect with me on LinkedIn. That QR code will take you directly to my profile. Like I said, 14 years in the space, as part of that being a consultant, part of it being an educator, and then for the last however many years being a demo dude educator for these sorts of things. So I think everybody's familiar with Microsoft's mission statement to empower every person in every organization on the planet to achieve more. You can really achieve more with Microsoft Cloud and specifically Power Automate. And the benefit to you and your organization is configurable automation platform to build upon, which doesn't require developers or IT intervention for a lot of different areas. And this can reduce your costs and improve your capability at your organization. And after today, you're going to walk away with a good overview and many of the building blocks that you need to get started for Power Automate. So the focus of the meeting today is, what is Power Automate? 2, what are the building blocks? And then 3, we're going to get into a demo scenario, then hopefully some Q&A at the end if there's additional questions. I did spend a number of the years as a consultant on the road, and now I'm doing demos specifically for Microsoft as well as Dynamics. So please feel free to stop me along the way and ask questions or chime in. I got no problem addressing things as they come up. So what is Power Automate? As you can see, it sits right in the 4 components of the Power Platform. It is a process automation tool. It can also be leveraged as an integration tool. And we do, in fact, use it in a lot of ways for notifications as well as workflows. So although you're just automating tasks and integrating stuff, you can also leverage what's known as approvals within Power Automate. So how does it work? Essentially, Power Automate allows you to build flows. And a flow consists of 2 main components. You have a trigger, which is actually initiating the flow to run. This can happen either on a schedule or when a certain event occurs. The scenario I have above is a business event that's occurring within Dynamics 365 for supply chain. The second piece of a flow is kind of all the actions that you're going to execute. So this is where all the automation comes in, whether it's going to be a notification or you're going to update another system. You can have conditionals that drive specific outcomes. So if this occurs, then do that. The second area that we're going to cover today is, the building blocks of Power Automate. So I want to familiarize everyone with the, not a full, maybe comprehensive list of everything, but all the main pieces you really do need to get started. And the first and most important thing that you need to see within Power Automate is all the connectors that are available. So the connectors within Power Automate is a wrapper or proxy for a web API of some type. And Power Automate makes it easy for business users, not web developers or folks who have an understanding of how APIs work, interact with the connectors within Power Automate. There's, as you can see, there's a number of Microsoft tools on this page, just a quick screenshot of a handful of them. This is not a full comprehensive list. There's a number of Microsoft tools, but also a lot of non-Microsoft tools. So, with Satya in the head of the charge here, there's, he's brought an open mind about bringing additional capabilities and growing the cloud outside of just pure Microsoft. Obviously, Microsoft is the first priority for a lot of these areas for new services that come to light, but it's no exception to have additional things out there like Twitter and Dropbox, Gmail, and some other competitive tools. One of the quick and easy ways to get started with Power Automate is to leverage the vast library that's out there already in the form of templates. So templates allow you to really quickly deploy and launch a new flow within Power Automate. This basically has a lot of kind of use cases that have been contributed from Microsoft as well as the user community. So basically, you can deploy a template and very quickly have a flow ready to go. Once you type in your credentials for the various components of whatever was included in that. One of the other main building blocks is conditionals. So in traditional logic and reasoning, you have if-else conditionals or even multi-type conditionals where you can have up to 10 or 15 different paths depending on what choices or options are being selected. This is a pretty powerful tool within Power Automate, as you can drive a lot of different integration scenarios and outcomes based on previous execution runs or depending on what actions are taking place. We also support looping. So there's a couple different ways you can loop or do repetitive actions within Power Automate. One is a do until. So you can basically rerun a specific loop until a condition has been met. In the example I have up on the screen, this is a really simple do until loop that is leveraging an integer counter, and it's going to run the loop 5 times. The other type of loop we have is an apply to each. So this is a row-based or record-based looping. So essentially, if you've got an Excel file or a number of records that are meeting a certain criteria, you can perform actions on all of those records. We also support the concept of variables. So a variable is something where you can actually store it and then reuse it later. So in some scenarios where you've got a lot of complex JSON or messages that are being passed back and forth, you might be only concerned about a couple of items in that. And instead of having to parse through that message and reuse that parsing, you can actually leverage a variable to recall in later steps or pass it on to a different action. So I've listed a couple of use cases. A couple of other neat use cases like I have in the actual screenshot here is the controlling a variable for controlling how many loops I'm going to be running. Another one is concatenation, so bringing together a lot of stuff or even potentially a calculation that requires some math. Another concept we have in Power Automate is the idea that we can provide the system a delay. So a delay is adding a pause to a particular flow from processing. So, if you've got an action that's going to do a bunch of stuff on a server or within a system, you can either pull that system for status periodically, or you can just kind of put in a really simplified version of that. If the operation typically takes 15 to 20 seconds, here's an example of where I'm delaying 30 seconds before I continue on processing. Not as elegant as polling for status, but certainly a lot simpler from a design perspective. We also have a delay until concept. So instead of waiting a specified amount of time, we can actually wait until a certain date or time is met before we continue on. Now, error handling is something that's often overlooked when building flows. If you've got any familiarity with Power Automate and Flow, you'll notice there's kind of a binary error handling that's kind of included natively. It either succeeded or it didn't succeed. But you can actually build some error handling directly into the flow itself. One of the simple ways of doing that is with a conditional. So a conditional can be some sort of check where you're testing to see if the outcome of whatever action is being performed was hit or not. And then there's also the more elegant approach, which is leveraging the idea that you can control whether or not something will run after something. I've pulled up the different options you have. So I have got the ability to run the catch statement if that try was failed, or I can run a finally step if the try or catch should run. This block that I have here in the orange is actually considered the scope control. So you can essentially build scope around a number of different actions that you'd like to group together. So if you've got a certain number of steps that are running for the main process, and then you've got a host of other steps to run either on a successful or a failed run, here's where you can get a little more crafty with designing your flow. Approvals is also built into Power Automate. I don't believe it was initially there when Microsoft Flow was launched back in 2016. But approvals is essentially a workflow, workflow light that's actually out in the Power Platform. So this allows me to, maybe not as rigid as a, full ERP workflow engine might be, like you'll see in Dynamics 365, but it does allow you to manage a process and documents. You can tie into, the Azure Active Directory to find org structure and those types of things. So it's not a full replacement for ERP workflow, but does allow you to have, simple approve, reject, or customize responses such as voting. You can assign and reassign these workflows to other folks within the organization. And there's also some concepts for adaptive cards. And we'll see this when I get into the demo in a little bit. But an adaptive card allows you to pull in some really slick information without a lot of work, like generating an email for the approval. We've also got additional settings to control whether or not we want to send those emails. And again, we'll see that as part of the demo. I think my last slide here is also talking about a mobile app. So just like, there's a number of different other Microsoft Power Platform mobile apps available. Power Automate is no exception. You do have a full mobile experience where you can build and view the different flows that you have associated to your particular account. We've also got the embedded capability to actually leverage the app for your approval. So, instead of managing it via email, you can also manage it here via your mobile app. And then finally, we talked a little bit on the triggers that are being executed as part of a flow. You can actually leverage the mobile app button press as a way to actually run and execute a flow. Here's an example of my Chuck Norris button joke that I can actually hit a web API to get a random Chuck Norris joke. I've found that some of these that are getting returned are not safe for work, so I just show the screenshot of the button now. And that's conclusion of the building blocks within Power Automate. If there aren't any questions up until this point, I have not been monitoring the chat. I can hop into demo.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet. So I will, if anybody does have any questions, go ahead and type them in or raise your hand and we'll pass them over to Mike. Otherwise you can carry on.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Power Automate. And just a quick orientation of the homepage here. You'll see we've got a homepage which provides you really ability to get educated on some popular services or showcase a couple of templates that are geared towards certain different areas. We've got the second item in our pane here is our action items. So these would be all of our workflows or approvals that have been run through Power Automate. I've also got a My Flows section, which is actually all of the flows that are attached to my particular account here. Within the flows, and very similar to the rest of the Power Platform, we do have this idea of having separate environments. So there are some flows that are contextually aware of what environment you are from, namely from a Dynamics 365, a Dataverse or Common Data Service environment perspective. We've also got a couple things down here for templates. So here's a listing of all the templates, connectors, all the connectors that are available to us, as well as some education and documentation behind them. And then some other advanced things like monitoring and AI Builder. Within the flows pane, we've got all of the, I'm going to focus on two different areas here today. One is the cloud flows, which is kind of the traditional where you would list all of your main flows for this particular environment. We also have a concept of sharing flows with other folks. So the ability for you to create a flow and then share it with somebody else as an owner or contributor to that flow. I'm going to go ahead and create a new flow. And when I click on the button up here for new flow, you'll see that I've got a couple of options. I can start with a template. So these are the templates that are being contributed by Microsoft in the community. There's also a way to provide a template from a kind of Visio flow chart. The other three areas that I wanted to touch on just from a Power Automate 101 perspective are the three different types of flows that we can create. We talked about a triggered flow based on a certain event, and that's this automated cloud flow. The scheduled flow, which can be run, every week or once a day or whatever cadence you'd like to schedule it. And then this instant cloud flow with a little button icon would actually build me a trigger that's based off of a button press within the mobile application. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new automated flow. And you've got a couple of options here. So the first thing it does is it provides you a number of kind of popular triggers. So there's a number of these out here that are part of this drop list. This is not a fully comprehensive list. It's just something that typically folks or even your own specific user is using. So you've got Microsoft Forms, you've got SharePoint. These are SharePoint lists. You can also skip this and go ahead on to the full-blown availability to see all the various triggers that are out there in the system. So when you're looking for a trigger, you can look at all the triggers. You have a nice search bar capability. I'm going to go ahead and type in SharePoint. And once I find SharePoint, this is actually the connector at the top. And at the bottom, we've got this, see a listing, comprehensive listing of all the various triggers that are available to us within SharePoint. So the one that I like to leverage is the SharePoint list. And if you're not familiar with SharePoint lists, they're a very simple way to build kind of a, more than an Excel file of data being collected. So I have a SharePoint list that I like to use and show quite often, which is this IT request list. It's nothing complex. I'm not suggesting this is a full ticketing system, but a title, a cost, timeline, and then, is this a system problem or is this kind of a hardware request type problem? So the flow that I'm going to build today is actually showing you how you can leverage that list inside Power Automate and start a workflow approval for a particular IT request. So first I'm going to go out and find the SharePoint list. And these are all my SharePoint sites. I'm going to hit my Dynamics 365 team site. And I'm going to hit my IT request. So this is basically saying that anytime a SharePoint list item is created, I'm going to go ahead and trigger this flow to start. Now, one of the best practices, and it's a good idea once you realize how these can get pretty complex, it's a good idea to rename the title of these. So instead of just saying when an item is created, you can be pretty specific about what's actually occurring on either the trigger or it's occurring on the particular action. So when IT request is added. So the next step in the building out of a flow, I'm actually going to build a new step. And that step is going to do what? I will go ahead and look for the approvals connector. And I am going to start an approval and wait for it to be executed before I continue. So the only option you need to select here is the type of approval that you're looking for. So you have a couple of different options on the approval side of things. Binary approve or reject. And then there's two types within that binary. You have either the first to respond as approved or rejected, or you're requiring everyone to actually respond before it's completed. So I'm going to do this first to respond. And we're going to go ahead and give this a, you'll see that once I select a particular option, the rest of the options will actually light up and allow me to start filling them in. So new IT request. Create. So I can simply put in plain text, or I can also include some data that was previously built into the actual SharePoint list item. So you'll see that off to the right, I have this ability to provide it with some dynamic content. So that dynamic content is stuff relevant to the actual SharePoint list item. So I can actually include, as part of the title of the workflow, I can include the title of the actual SharePoint list item as well. The assignment is where I've got this ability to assign this to a particular user. Now, in this case, I'm assigning it to myself, but you very well could do something a little more sophisticated, such as, step into Azure Active Directory, take a look at whoever my direct report is, or whoever my manager is, and then actually send it to that person for approval. Or look into the org structure for IT expense or IT request approval people and send it to a particular group. Now here's where I can provide some details. I've got myself a template of details to provide. So essentially I'm asking the question, well, first just saying a new IT request was submitted, who sent it. So I can actually say who created the particular request, what could be the actual title of this, and then how much. You'll notice I can actually search for the cost of this. You'll notice there's probably a lot of things. You can also leverage the ability to search the dynamic content, just like we can search for the connectors and triggers and stuff. So I'm pulling this in, and essentially now I've got an approval that will be generated, sent to myself for a new IT request, and then some details about the request. We do have the ability to provide a link or a description to the link. And then there are some additional advanced options here. So, do we want to include notifications? Do we want to allow a reassignment? And then perhaps even attach some data to this particular request. Maybe there's an image or attachments to the SharePoint list that would like to be included as part of the approval. That might be helpful for evaluating whether it should be accepted or rejected. Okay, so now we've got an approval. Of course, we could rename this, but I'm not going to have any other approvals here. And we're going to go ahead and grab a new step. And the new step, we're going to have a condition. So the condition of this would be taking a peek at the outcome of the approval and evaluating whether or not it's approved or rejected. So I'm going to say outcome of the approval is equal to approve. So essentially, if this item was approved, what I want to actually do is, maybe send a formalized request or something into an ERP, like a new purchase requisition. But for simplicity's sake, what I'm going to do is simply just update the record in the SharePoint list to reflect the status of approved. So one of the things that we see, and if I go ahead and create a new SharePoint list item, I've actually got request as a column on the SharePoint list. Submitted is my default, and then I have two other statuses of approved and rejected. So I assume that it's going to come in as a submitted SharePoint item. So I'm going to go ahead and find, and this time it's going to be update an item. And again, we're going to type in our SharePoint site and list. And now we need to identify the ID of the row that we're actually going to update. So in this case, it's the ID attached to our IT request is added. And here's where we would come in and fill in all the relevant data. So one of the things with the SharePoint lists, and I've had mixed behaviors, but I'm just re-entering all of the fields as filled from the original SharePoint list is just what I've found the best success with. So system problem, custom. And now instead of submitted status, we're going to go ahead and change this to approved. Okay. And I'm going to rename this one to update. Now I'm going to have to do the same thing over here on the no side, but instead of approved, I'm going to list it as rejected. And one of the neat things, I think it's still in preview, but I've got this ability to copy this to the clipboard. So when I copy it to the clipboard and I go ahead and add an action, of course I can go find SharePoint again and update an item, or we've got this My Clipboard dropdown, which does remember all of the stuff that I just entered on this other option over here. So I have added this, course, it comes in all the same as it did as update as approved. So I'm going to have rename this to update as rejected. And I'm also going to change, of course, the value of this from approved now to rejected. And that is it. So that's a really basic Power Automate flow to take a SharePoint list item and depending on whether or not it was approved or rejected, either update it in the SharePoint list and go on our merry way. So now we're going to go ahead and test this out. Now we do have an option to test up here, but what we can do is, since this is probably already live, you'll notice on the details here, this is actually when you create a flow, it defaults it to being an on status. So since it's on, we can actually test it with the SharePoint list here. And I'm going to go ahead and enter 2 items here. Mike needs a new keyboard, $100, current need, not a system problem, and save. I'm gonna go ahead and create another one so that we can see both an approved as well as rejected. I'm gonna go ahead and say, what else do I need? The mouse, cheaper, current need, and again, not a system problem. Okay, so now we, on our flow, we can sit and wait. And this usually does take a few seconds to pick up. One of the other things, I've actually got a couple of different things here. I want to make sure that I'm, yep. So I'm going to continue to click refresh. It looks like it did pick up a couple runs here 11 seconds ago. And we can see those in a couple places. One, we can see them in our approvals. So we'll be able to see all of the received or sent and all the full history of all the approvals that have kind of been run through. I think I've got a number of these out there in a different order. And if I take a look at my inbox, I'm hoping to see this delivered to my inbox. And of course, the demo magic, we need to take a look at why this didn't actually get triggered. Perhaps it sent it to another place. So when you drill into actually one of the flows that are running, you can actually take a peek in real time where it's actually at in the process here. So I've started and waited for an approval. I believe I'm just waiting for the email and the approvals to actually catch up here. While we're running, does anybody have any questions about what we saw so far?
Feel free just to come off mute if you do have any questions. Really quiet bunch today.
Of course, the curse of the demo guy not coming through immediately. So one other thing I can check is make sure that this is indeed a live connection. One of the things that can get you in trouble when you've got a number of different accounts spread across multiple email addresses or logins or demo accounts can, in fact, set these up to use credentials and access to other accounts. So of course, this is my demo account. I've also got an account for my RSM email as well. And should be the correct connection. And I might just be having an issue either with email or Power Automate. Of course, there's not a lot of details to see what's actually going on behind the scenes. I'm going to go ahead and add another connection with the same credentials to just make sure that it's live and active. It looks like Flow is hanging all together here. So in lieu of trying to do this again, not sure if we should continue to wait or go on to Q&A or many other advanced kind of topics you guys might have with Power Automate.
I'm not seeing anything in the question window here. Do you want to move on to another advanced piece, and maybe this will come
we
out
do
of whatever
have
holes in it?
somebody with their hand up.
Babs. Oh, Babs, sorry, you just put your hand up. Go ahead, ask a question.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much for the demo. Just want to ask a quick question. Can Power Automate be used for like a source, like a form of data migration, like to transfer data from one place to another?
Yeah, certainly it can be. This basically allows, what I like about it is the ability to be able to connect to another service, whether that's an API. I work largely in Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain, and there is a very robust data management platform that's built into the ERP, and that is available to us here within Power Automate as a connector. Now, there's also tools in the ERP to just leverage a file upload for a migration. Power Automate or Flow would normally be leveraged for kind of a periodic or weekly, monthly, daily type load into the system. And then kind of a step further, there's one of the enterprise or big brother version of Power Automate is actually called Azure Logic Apps. Follows a very similar pattern of kind of how you build it and how you structure it. And instead of just having these tools available to you with kind of low code, no code, you can also leverage some more pro developer tools like an Azure function or some ETL or transformation that might need to take place as part of that logic app.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question here. Michael, wondering, Ryan was saying he's, actually, Ryan, do you want to come off mute and ask a question, or I can ask it if you don't want to?
Yeah, I can for sure. I was discussing using Power Automate with some of our internal IT groups, and they were kind of frowning upon it to a certain extent because the flows are linked to your specific user account. Do you have any commentary on that?
Yeah, so connections is certainly one of the main talking points, and I mentioned logic apps in that previous comment because it is meant for the more of the integration approach where you have a number of admin or IT users that have access to all of the logic apps. When you talk about connecting to a system, they have connectors that make it really easy to talk to this, but really what you're talking to is the API. So if you wanted to get out of the connector world, you can move into a place where you can actually deal with it at an application level. So again, with my familiarity with Dynamics 365, instead of leveraging the connector, what I could leverage is actually the web API to communicate with it. And then I can have kind of a shared credential library instead of having an actual user account tied to it. So I hear your the concerns on the Power Automate. I'd be happy to talk offline on kind of what could be a better strategy, leveraging a similar framework, but with another tool like Logic Apps.
Okay, thanks.
And it doesn't look like this is going to go, so I'm going to cancel this and see if a resubmission will help. So this is actually one of the things you can do from a monitoring perspective, is actually resubmitting. And hopefully this will pick it up. Actually, I never actually looked at seeing if this was listed in my sent items, and I can take a look at where it might have been sent. So I did in fact send the request. So here's the actual sent, but it doesn't look like they have anything on the receiving side of, here we go. And magically they all four showed up at the same time. So I've received all four. Now these two have now been kind of canceled from a run perspective, but these are the two current ones. And it's still kind of unsure why it didn't show up in my email box. I wonder if Office 365 is a little bit behind, but here I do have the ability to come in and either approve or reject this. I'm going to go ahead and approve the mouse. And I will, you can also approve or reject with the checkbox or the X. So I'm going to go ahead and reject the keyboard. So now we have an acceptance and a rejection. Of course, I'll probably have these emails come through after the demo is up, but we can take a look at the flows now, and we should have seen them complete. And you do see that they have been completed. So here we can actually review the steps that it took. So we'll see that the new keyboard was in fact rejected, and the mouse was approved. So if we come into our SharePoint list, we'll actually see now that they are now listed here in a status of approved and rejected. So we missed out on the ability to see the email here, but for all intents and purposes, what the email looks like is it's a really basic email that has an adaptive card that allows me to do the same things that I actually did here from the approvals tab of Power Automate. Now the last flow that I like to show, just for kind of one of my some of this stuff can become pretty addictive, and with the pandemic in the past year, I've been riding the Peloton bike a lot more than I had been before. And what I did was they actually do have a web API that's available to connect to all of your Peloton data. And I actually built a Power Automate flow to go out every night and collect my ride stats and then publish them to a Power BI data set. So I have basically a simple login. Now, for things that don't have a connector that's pre-built, such as Peloton, you actually can leverage the pure HTTP web requests. So authorize a login, collect information from that login and grab the cookie, and then also get my ride data, pushing it over to a OneDrive location to which is being read from a Power BI data set. And then within that Power BI data set, of course, I have Power BI report that's showing my analytics for all of my ride data. Peloton workspace and my dashboard. So really basic example, but again, the addictive nature of Power Automate and kind of what you can do with it is very fun and powerful. And I do find that, as long as it's a valid use case, might not have applicability, specifically to the business world, but using the tools is kind of what I like to showcase and kind of how you can think outside of the normal box. So, in conclusion, we introduced you to the citizen developer tools within Power Automate, kind of got the building blocks, overview of what it is, and then of course the demonstration with one real world scenario and then one not so real world business scenario. I've left my contact information up on the screen if you'd like to reach out or you've got additional questions. But I'm not sure, Chris, how much time we have left, but I'd be happy to answer any other additional questions that we might have.
We have a few minutes here, so if there are any questions, do feel free to reach out. I think I just saw a hand just go up. Brenda, I don't see a last name here. Do you want to come off mute and ask a question?
Sure, thanks, Chris. Mike, can you talk a little bit about the process that happens when you go into the SharePoint list and choose approve, and then if the email's delayed, let's say there's a problem with the server, and then you get the email later to approve reject. Can you talk about what happens in that case?
Sure. So the case that I had, everything was tied to a single flow run, and that's one of the other cases that instead of sending the email through approvals, you can actually have a separate email that's being sent and maybe include the data behind what's in the approvals. You essentially have this ability, and as you saw it in that example, multiple approvals that are actually sitting out there for me to approve or reject. I was, 10 minutes might not seem like a long, time. It is for a demo, of course, but maybe not in actuality. And there's this whole idea of catch up, but you did have some information behind the flow, so I could actually drill into the specific run and see, which flow was getting hung up. In that case, I could have canceled the flow altogether, or I could have gone directly to the SharePoint list. But it's really identifying that I have an issue. And to identify that you have an issue, either is setting an alert on, or watching the various flows that are being run, or even include some error handling or checks and balances within the flow. So, if something's not hit in a timely manner, such as, 4 hours or 2 hours or whatever SLAs you might have with responding to your folks in the organization, you can build some of that in with some more sophisticated logic.
Thanks, Mike. But I was more questioning that you've approved the request, but the email hasn't arrived. So say 2 minutes later, the email arrives. Do you just delete it, or maybe there's multiple people that can be approving, and if you hit approve again, what happens, or reject?
Yeah, so that's one of the things with the way that the approvals work is when you run a second flow, I actually am creating myself a second approval. So that's kind of difficult and challenging. What you do need to do if you're responding to the same approval that's just late arriving to one inbox versus the other, you have a different situation. You'll actually get a feedback saying, hey, this has already been approved or this has already been rejected. So that's definitely a challenge. And again, that's kind of why I highlight it as not kind of a full replacement to something more financially backing or a ERP type rigid workflow.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a question for you, Mike. So, every now and again, the discussion between Logic Apps and Power Apps does come up. What's kind of a general line or requirement where you say, hey, what you're talking about there maybe should be done inside of Logic Apps versus Power App?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a multi-layered question. First off, the way Power Automate is licensed is kind of per user, and generally there's no restriction on how much you're actually using Power Automate. Logic Apps takes a different approach. You have no user licensing whatsoever. You have a consumption model. So it's based on how many triggers or cadence that you're looking for. So how many times you're executing a trigger, and then how many times you're executing all the actions. So if you have a Logic App designed to check something every 5 seconds to see if it's there or not, that can become a pretty expensive logic app. So there's that begs the question of, does it need to be pulled that often? And there's a lot of design elements that would then go into it. The other aspect is, the ability to tie into some other pro dev type tools, such as building an Azure function around maybe doing some transformation, or something that would otherwise take 10 or 15 actions, and I can write an Azure function to do all of those in kind of one step. Granted, I need a pro developer to build out the logic, but that's where you can kind of get around some of that consumption model. And then finally, the ability, kind of to share, within Power Automate, I can share with you, Chris, or somebody else, and they have access to it like an admin, but it is tied to user accounts and not tied to your tenant. So that's one thing you also get with Logic Apps, is this ability to have a central place where all the IT or admins can contribute. You can also hide things like, from with security credentials or application secrets, so you don't have to have usernames and passwords kind of driving your main enterprise integration strategy.
Great answer, thank you. Yeah, not an easy one to answer.
Yeah. I have been shifting a lot of, I do a lot of Power Automate, but also a lot of Logic Apps development, and I got a lot of feedback on kind of the pricing structure, but it does, it is a different paid model, and you just have to understand kind of how it works. But again, there's a lot of other components there.
Yeah, and I suppose in some ways it kind of has some of the similar elements of Power BI. Is the Power Apps can be done by a business user, whereas Logic Apps, you're probably not going to have a business user sitting in front of Logic Apps. You're going to hand that then over to IT, right? So you got to decide who's going to perform the work and who has the skills to do it. So that's always a decision point in these things as well.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if your strategy still is Logic Apps, you can still have an end user build out whatever automation they want as kind of a proof of concept, and then IT can take that flow. And I believe there's a template to import Power Automate, like a template into Logic Apps, so they can at least seed it with the architecture built by the business user. Then you can harden it with keys and how you interact with different systems. So there's still some value in maybe even starting there, or letting a power user accomplish something in an automated fashion before you kind of move into a fully paid world.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a great way to kind of do some initial requirements gathering. Users can do what they want for a little while first and say, I want this hardened, versus I don't quite know what I want. And then you spend a lot of time trying to gather requirements, and also similar techniques and
I've got need this file moved, but I need these 10 fields changed or altered, and very easy for a data transformation guy to build a quick Azure function to do that heavy lifting.